Everything else starts with childhood. Things people learn from their parents and early institutions, church, schools, interaction with other kids.
Parents are good at doing what parents have to do, which is to instill values and give some sense of, what counts most. And that's what I do with my kids. I can't ask that they accept and embrace every single political position I have or every point of view that I would have, but I hopefully in trying to raise my kids, my wife and I will give them some perspective and some sense of what we think matters based on our faith, based on a way in which we operate as people.
We have a 21-year-old, and it's when she turned 18, or even before she turned 18, we took her down to register to vote. We took her to the polls, and I said, that's what my parents did for me, and I think it's the same kind of socialization process.
And one of the things that we found in a lot of our research, and it's very characteristic of the United States, is kids learn something about democracy by practicing it in school. Having school elections, so the schools are really the schools for democracy, not only in terms of what they are taught, but what they actually get a chance to do.
Political values that children acquire at home and in school are supported by other forces in their lives.
One of the basic forces that shapes people's political attitudes is religion. And so you get a lot of people who are raised in religious families, and that has a major impact throughout their lives on what they think is right and wrong.
I am more conservative than my peer group. I think a great deal of it comes from having been educated in the Roman Catholic tradition. We had something called the daily examination of conscience. This was the 1950s. And it developed a habit of mind of asking morally based questions, not just about my life, but about my life as a citizen or our collective life through our government. Made me interested in questions of right and wrong.
I think that having been raised in a family where we used to have missionaries come to our home and tell us about the terrible plight of people in China and the terrible plight of people in South America and India and so forth. Well, I don't wear my religion on my sleeve, but if you ask me where it comes from, I think it comes largely from the home in which I was raised. And then the Vietnam War. That war had a lot to do with my experience. Then my psychiatry, my profession, where I spent my time in mental hospitals and prisons, gave me a very wide experience in terms of what the human problems are in our society. So somewhere in that mix of that religious and the Vietnam War and my professional experience, my political philosophy evolved.
Political attitudes formed early in life seldom change dramatically, but the basic framework is etched and refined by life experiences.
People have done studies of lots of students who were active in the 1960s.
This happened a long time ago.
And then you come back to them 20 years later, and of all those radicals now working on Wall Street is not true. There are some, but the largest number of them are ordinary citizens, but they tend to be of the left. They vote Democratic. A number of them remain active in more moderate causes, but causes nevertheless.
Having come of age during the 60s, having been very politically involved in the 60s, that changes, or it changed everything for me. I'm from Iowa, a small town, really one of the last bastions of civic culture, where people take voting very seriously, but when you combine notions of civic duty, notions of civic responsibility, again, Midwest sense of justice, walking in another person's shoes, all cliches, golden rule. Well, when you combine that with the movements of the 60s, whether it was the women's movement or the civil rights movement, education reform movement, it really is in some ways the tension between the ideal that you were raised with and the gap between the ideal and the practice. And I think that that's probably been a huge motivating factor.
People's minds do not have to be set in cement. what happens during their lives does influence their point of view. For example, those who were strictly anti-feminist found that they changed their minds considerably when they had daughters. Then, of course, because the daughters, in many respects, are believed to be extensions of themselves, they wanted their daughters to have more opportunities that they would have been appalled if their spouses had had.
What I think is the really important point is when people are in the adult world, in their roles, then how their role is affected by various policies is what socializes them politically. If a woman graduates from college with a nice BA degree and has experienced no real sexual harassment or discrimination up until that point, but the point is, and then she goes into a corporation and finds out she's constantly mistreated and that there's no sexual harassment officer and so on, she looks around and suddenly hears somebody mention the EEOC or mention that Democrats believe there should be more laws against discrimination against women in corporations, and then she perks up and she becomes a Democrat in the face of that experience. So I don't give much house to always talk about political socialization. It's what people are experiencing, what do they see as an opportunity for themselves.
People change. Some people really move from one side to another. People bounce around, but there's a lot of continuity. You can tell what a person's going to be like if you know a lot about where they were when they were 20, 21, just joining the electorate.